Welcome to the Functional Medicine Doc Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kurt Woeller, talking with experts in functional and integrative health and medicine, discussing critical information for improving your health and wellness to help you live a long, full life. Let's get to it. Well, hello, everybody. This is Dr. Kurt Woeller. Welcome to the program. And we're going to have another conversation today about cancer, and specifically cancer related to nutrition, or perhaps nutrition and cancer, and things that can be done with individuals who are dealing with cancer. And we're going to talk about a lot of other important information in this interview. I'm joined by Christina Santini, who is a registered dietitian and clinical nutritionist with a lot of experience in this field. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So Christina, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it, Dr. Woeller.
So give the audience a little bit of overview on your training, your practice, and then how you got interested in this particular area.
Yeah, so I actually got interested in it in a biology class in high school. I was reading a book about how the brain is built up by amino acids and how that affects people's addictive traits. So I later began to research how amino acids from our diet might actually play into this. And I realized that there was a lot of books already written on the topic by Dr. Carl Pfeiffer and Dr. Eric Braverman. And so I went to work for him in New York a couple of years, which was super great because he was working cross-disciplinary with a lot of different practitioners. And that really opened up my understanding of just how complex and how many different fields of knowledge it takes to truly understand what makes a person sick and to also reverse the course of disease. Working with cancer was kind of more of a matter of supply and demand, just because back then, this was like 10 years ago when I also started own practice. Those were the people who were seeking out nutrition. It was either that or obesity, and I wasn't so much into counting calories back then, although I'm sure we'll also get into obesity is much more complex than that because we have so many chemicals today that also play into that. But back then, I thought kind of medicinal nutrition, cancer, that became a field I got interested in because of kind of the need for it.
I have a question before we jump into the cancer topic. So a clinical nutritionist, registered dietitian. Right?
I'm just going to correct you. I'm not a registered dietitian. Okay. I took my internship another place, so I can only call myself a dietitian. It's like a...
Yeah. Perfect. Yes. But the training, right? Because before we started the interview, we talked about traditional training, basic sciences, medical sciences, et cetera, the benefit of that. So I'm curious, just from a dietitian standpoint, you talked about counting calories, and then your work as a clinical nutritionist. My impression is both have value, but obviously you get a dietitian background and then you can build on that. And then there's some people that enter this field as just, a clinical nutritionist. They come from a different angle. Can you just real quickly describe kind of maybe the differences and how things have merged for you? And then I want to relate that to the world of cancer and nutrition, because we could look at how maybe a traditional dietitian would look at cancer, and then more of an expanded integrative clinical nutritionist would think of cancer. So can you just briefly describe maybe the differences between the dietitian route and a clinical nutrition route?
Yeah, I would have to say a traditional dietitian route would be, we'd be mainly focused that the client doesn't starve to death. That's what we're focused on. Okay. And we're also seeing this in hospitals, like the dietitians who they hire, they are more focused on, are they getting their calorie needs met? And that can be basically from Ensure, things that are full of sugar and poor quality fats. It's almost make my skin crawl to think that can be happening in a hospital because there are so many easier ways to ensure that. That said, of course, we know a lot of cancer patients, also due to the effects of chemo, they die from undernourishment, but you could certainly do it a better way. But that would be a traditional kind of dietitian where we're just kind of focusing, unfortunately, on the calories when it comes to cancer. You have good dietitians who work with heart disease, and there's a diet fit for that, and there's a diet fit for diabetes, which definitely has credibility to it. But we're not understanding the bigger picture of, I mean, I remember leaving school and I was frustrated because I did not feel qualified at all to handle patients. And I realized I needed to figure out these things myself, because back then there was no functional medicine kind of way of training. So I sought out courses on understanding labs based on biochemical abnormalities, also understanding Ayurvedic medicine, health philosophy, thermography screening. I was very interested in understanding the cause of why we get sick, because it just seems quite common sense, really, that we're just treating a lot of the symptoms. People are not asking, why did you get cancer? I think that is like the fundamental answer, the question to ask with everything. So I'd say that is probably the biggest difference. It's really, is the practitioner or the person, is it a curious person? Do they have a curious mind? Because that's going to lead them down the functional medicine, we would call it biological medicine probably back then, route. And I also did that and studied biological medicine later in Switzerland. And yeah,
it's very similar to my experience. I went to osteopathic medical school. We get introduced to certain concepts. You have your basic sciences, but when you come out, you're pretty much in an internship residency program, very traditional. And I wasn't satisfied with that. And so I got luckily introduced to different types of concepts from an integrative functional standpoint. And I feel like for the past 25 plus years, I have just been on a continual treadmill of learning, so like I never left residency or we're doing all kinds of fellowships. So the same thing, it sounds like, with you. So let's talk about the role of nutrition in cancer intervention. Obviously, this is a huge topic. There's lots of different types of cancers. So I'm going to let you kind of take the lead on this. I'm going to ask questions, but just from this standpoint, nutrition and cancer intervention, what is your view on this? How do you approach it? And let's take it from there.
Well, I think nutrition is absolutely important when it comes to cancer, but I also totally want to clarify that I only think it's a small part of the puzzle, actually, and especially because when I have cancer clients coming to me, then oftentimes they're the ones who are most focused on trying to find healing through nutrition. And I think that can be a little bit dangerous because I view cancer as a multifactorial disease. And there are so many other things rather than just going on some type of extreme diet where you think you can starve out the cancer that needs to be addressed. So absolutely. I mean, we know that if we're looking at nutrition also from the standpoint of obesity, simply is the person overeating? We know that this is driving 20% of the cancer deaths in female and approximately 16% of the cancer deaths in male. And this is simply just people are eating too many calories. So that is kind of a also basic dietitian viewpoint. Just don't overeat. It's a very bad idea. And we're also seeing now that 64% of the adult population in the States is overweight. But again, this is not just due to calories. Many of the things that are driving obesity is also driving cancer. And if we look into things like some of these obesogenes, like environmental toxins, mold, some of the heavy metals like mercury, they also affect blood sugar. So if I'm stuck in my dietitian mindset, I'm looking at a cancer patient thinking that blood sugar control is really important because we know that cancer cells thrive with insulin is when that is not controlled properly. I might miss the boat because I might recommend the patient to begin to avoid fruit, begin to avoid all carbs in my quest to try to normalize the blood sugar. But if I don't understand that things like mercury, that messes up the insulin sensitivity, I might have a patient who's taking out healthy foods that actually are full of flavonoids that actually kill cancer cells in a petri dish. I mean, a lot of fruits, actually, if you put them in a petri dish with cancer cells, they actually have a cancer killing properties. And that is really interesting because the cancer cells, they like glucose. They're absolutely going to eat the fruit. But inside the fruit with the glucose, it's full of flavonoids. So our thinking of just focusing on carbs or glucose, it needs to be a little bit more nuanced. While it's true that blood sugar control is the one most important thing to get control of, the way we do that is really to look at the patient as a whole, environmental toxins, also nutrient deficiencies, chromium, zinc. And again, some of these can also drive cancers if they are taking in higher dosages than the client needs. So when it comes to cancer, a lot of it is about balance and really testing the cancer client to understand what biochemical abnormalities, what toxic load, what nutrition deficiencies is playing into this piece of their journey to develop cancer.
And then it's a really interesting point, and I completely agree. It's not just focusing on, like you said, an element, or a sugar or whatever. It's looking at things in much more comprehensive, which goes from the dietitian training, traditional, to now the clinical nutritionist integrative standpoint. Before we move on, I want to ask you, can you relate this glucose metabolism calorie concept to the Warburg effect and this aerobic glycolysis that is often talked about in the world of oncology cancer, at least in an integrative standpoint? Can you give any insight into that?
Well, I mean, bottom line, Otto Warburg discovered this method in 1926, and he discovered that cancer cells, they are dependent on glucose molecules to a higher degree than our normal molecules. And that is because that they go through the glucolysis instead of the Krebs cycle. And that is highly dependent on the availability of glucose molecules, and then they ferment it into lactate in the body. So that is really kind of thought to be, back then at least, they thought, okay, this is the cause of cancer. But this is simply a mechanism. It's like the preferred way, but it's not the cause of cancer. And this is also why we're seeing so much fear mongering around carbs. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I think we can all agree that we have issues with white flour, white sugar, nutrient lacking in some of these things and imbalances. But I think the fear mongering around whole foods is secondary. I mean, we can make some small adjustments. We can use the keto diet very strategically in combination with chemotherapy. I believe from the research I've seen that the keto diet, when done in combination with chemo, definitely can help to attack the sick cells more strategically. But on the other hand, we also know that many cancers, they have a high load of various environmental toxins and also xenoestrogens, and they get converted, detoxed by the liver through a process called glucuronidation. And for that process to happen properly, there needs to be carbs present.
Right.
Otherwise, it's not happening optimally. So sometimes you hear the argument that we don't need carbs. That is correct. We do not need them to live. It's not like amino acids or fats, but we need them to function optimally. And that is left out. We actually do need carbs to function optimally and to detox.
And that's really it's really interesting. And you think about real quickly on the Warburg scenario, it gets that concept or that principle, that mechanism gets used by a cancer cell to increase its efficiency and access to ATP, which makes sense, right? A rapidly replicating cell needs quick energy. And you would think, well, then therefore that mechanism must be abnormal. Well, but not really, because a lot of the immune cells, during their heightened activity against an infection, or you need rapid replication of certain immune cells, well, they can switch to that aerobic glycolysis scenario too. So in that particular case, it's then a normal reaction. So it's not necessarily a bad reaction. It's a mechanism that exists, biochemically, and it's utilized in various ways. Obviously, from a cancer standpoint, it's not good, but from a general immune system standpoint, it's beneficial. And to your point about, the carb, fat, protein, arguments, I think really when you kind of get down to it, in reality for most people, it's sort of a balanced diet. You could maybe touch on that. And then I guess I gather is that there's not the one anti-cancer diet, I'm assuming, right? It's going to be unique to the individual based on perhaps their biochemical individuality. I work in the world a lot with autism, and you will hear a lot about different diets. And I keep telling people there's not one autism diet.
Oh, I love
There's
that.
components of diets that can be used and are beneficial for a select individual, and it seems to be the same way in cancer patients, like the keto or the carnivore or whatever. All of them have some value, but again, it's the individual. And that, in essence, Christina, to me, is what makes the integrative medicine approach so unique, whereas the traditional, conventional approach, it's simplistically, but maybe one size fits all type of thing. So let's continue on. I'm curious about, let's go through a few things about, let's say, red meat consumption, for example, the pros and cons, the balance of omega fats, the role of fiber, vegetables. I mean, you just touched on the fact that fruits, yeah, they have sugar, but they also have those flavonoids and other antioxidants, which can be beneficial. So give the audience maybe a bit, on just sort of a general overview from a nutritional standpoint of some pros and cons to these different things, of what may get people starting to think about when it comes to their unique body or their unique situation.
I mean, I love what you said, and I just have to chime in with, I do think, though, that we still have a thinking problem, even in integrative medicine and functional medicine, because you're seeing people coming from the allopathic training, but their thinking process has not changed. And that means you're seeing practitioners, like, they're prescribing to, under the name of the functional medicine concept, that now everybody should be on the keto diet, like you said, and everybody should be in carnivore, or you're going to starve out mold. I mean, these are crazy theories where they're not understanding how the rest of the body works. And it's so obvious that they're coming from still thinking about things compartmentalized and in symptoms, and even just like managing SIBO, digestive disorders. It's like, if you're stuck thinking that you're working as an integrative practitioner with SIBO and you're prescribing the food map diet for everyone, it's like you're still not asking the curious questions. Why are they getting SIBO? People are not asking enough whys, and the same for cancer. Because I mean, I know you know that as well, that SIBO, typically it's SIFO also from mold. And that if you want to fix it, you need to fix the house. You need to fit the mold issue, not just prescribe to a specific carb diet. So, I mean, also just for patients and for practitioners alike, when you venture outside allopathic medicine, it's still very confusing, because we have this fundamental thinking problem and people are not curious. So I totally just agree with what you said. I just had to kind of go off on a tangent.
And I agree with what you said, because you're right about, we do have a thinking problem. People get locked into the sort of conventional allopathic thinking, in all things.
Still.
And so I was like, well, I'm going to apply a vitamin instead of a med.
Yes.
Therefore, I'm practicing integrative medicine.
Yes.
I'm like, well, it might help, but yeah, you're right. And this is one of the things I do in my training programs all the time, is I not only push myself to try to understand things at a deeper level, but the material that I present to practitioners is meant to at least instill perhaps a desire to learn more and dig deeper, because I really believe as integrative practitioners, we have to be well trained and be able to look at things and be able to think and integrate. And the whys are important. And so the whys then come down to, as you mentioned, why does somebody have cancer? Why does it persist? Why does it come back? What else may be happening? Because it's not just the cancer itself, it's the template of their body, it's their immune system, it's their biochemistry, it's their microbiome, all of those types of things. So when we think about just nutrition in general, pros and cons of meat, omega 3, 6, 9, fiber,
Yeah.
vegetables. How does that plan? I mean, each one of those could be its own lecture interview. Well, let's kind of break it down just from a general standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most controversial would be red meat. And I mean, it is interesting right now. I just got a client who has been to another practitioner. I don't know what their background is, though, but they prescribe the carnivore diet to all their cancer clients. And some with good results. I mean, I don't think we really have enough research for it. But it kind of, again, goes to show that diet is, as long as you're eating whole foods, I really don't think it's so important as long as you're managing your blood sugar control. That said, and I'm just saying this because red meat is kind of in allopathic dietitian school that drives cancer. Limit red meat. And while I think that there is some research that points kind of clearly, and I'm saying that quote unquote, because what is clearly with scientific research on nutrition really, because this is processed red meat. Is it, I mean, oftentimes they make studies, they're eating hamburgers. It's like just junk food.
Is that because it's considered an inflammagen? Do you understand why they're making that association with red meat?
I mean, it's also some of the amino acid compounds probably, but I think a lot of it, and I think there are different theories, I mean, in the studies as to why it is. I don't feel confident in that anyone really knows for sure that they can say this is how red meat would drive cancer, apart from saying, well, if it's processed, we know that we're going to create some of these compounds that we know are cancerous. We know that we often also cook it in such a way that some of the amino acids get damaged and we get acrylamide. But a lot of it has more to do with how we're preparing the meat. And red meat is just often high heat. You're damaging, you're creating some acrylamides. There is also some research on beneficial versus not so beneficial, or actually cancer-driving amino acid compounds. So it is also a question about if you're getting all your amino acids just from red meat every day, you're getting a lot of tyrosine and phenylalanine, and a lot of cancers, they actually do like those compounds. So there are many kind of different ways to explain it, yet I would still argue that I wouldn't even be so worried about whether you're choosing an extreme short-term diet if you are eating whole foods, even though I'm definitely not a proponent for the carnivore diet. Yeah. But I don't believe in the allopathic medicine that it's like you're having a steak as a cancer patient and this is going to drive out your cancer rate. We're seeing a lot of beneficial nutrients if it's grass-fed, if it has the right fatty acid profile. And also when we were looking at the China study, which I wrote my bachelor thesis on, which is a plant-based vegan study done in the 80s that is often kind of quoted by the vegan population as explaining why a vegan diet is clearly better for every disease under the sun. The science is incredibly flawed in the China study because they're not looking at how are things prepared. And back in China also, the meat was moldy. They didn't have proper storage of the meat. So it's like you're taking things that are causing rotten, bad quality meat, and then you're proposing that this food is bad. I mean, people could be eating moldy grapes, and then you conclude that grapes are bad.
The other thing you think about that too is the mycotoxins. I mean,
exactly.
Without control, you get
exactly.
cows that are eating moldy
exactly.
grain or whatever, and those mycotoxins go into their meat, they go into their milk.
Exactly.
So that's very interesting. What about fiber? I mean, that's a big topic too, but.
Yeah. And I do want to say that I do advise my clients to stick to red meat no more than I actually limit it for my cancer clients. So I'm a little bit, I always take a precautious standpoint if in doubt. And some of the preparation, I actually just don't believe it's such a big deal as we sometimes think it is.
But I'm assuming it's going to be red meat of grass-fed beef.
Yes.
Or elk meat, not.
Yes, or lamb.
Or lamb, or not some fast food hamburger or something.
No,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
But again, we're into the quality of food. So it's like, is it the quality of food, the preparation, or is it the actual food, like you're saying?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to fiber, I mean, this is definitely a big thing. We know that just about over 50% of the population is chronically constipated. They made studies that actually show that people have approximately 5 pounds, I think it was, of just rotten stool, fecal matter sitting inside their gut.
Wow.
Because of such poor eating habits. And I mean, we need the fiber, we need the roughage, we need these anti-nutrients actually from plants to scrub out our guts. So also a lot of these theories that we're scared now of the anti-nutrients in plants. First off, when we cook them, when we prepare them, many of these anti-nutrients simply disappear. The oxalates that people are also scared of, they mainly come from mold. At least you want to look into that before you cut out all the healthy food groups. I mean, some people are drinking so much spinach juice that it can become an issue. But again, you want to look at what's affecting the kidney, why they're not excreting. But with the fiber, yes, I'm a big fan of that. And I mean, when we're looking at native people who are living more in nature, they have had a fiber intake of upwards of 100 grams and sometimes even more. Your standard American is eating 8 grams. It is completely ridiculous. And most people are taking supplements to try to make them go to the toilet. Some people are only going to the toilet once a week, and they have digestive issues or IBS. And we also know that all inflammation, I mean, it starts in the gut and then something else is also affecting the gut. So it's not the cause. But if your gut is inflammatory, nothing else, no nutrients are going to matter because there's going to be so much rotten matter that is just stuck there. So you really want to get the waste out with some fiber, at least 40 grams a day. And the research is pretty clear on that also for colon cancer.
Right. And you also think about fiber and just the microbiome, and that could be another entire conversation with the microbiome and the impact it has on the body and the benefits of fiber, obviously, for the microbiome. And that's kind of where then, too, the fiber standpoint comes into play with regards to fruits and vegetables. Obviously, there's a balance. Overdo it in one direction could be problematic, but there's obviously beneficial things to those types of foods as well. Any specifics with regards to things like protective vitamins and minerals that, again, I'm not advocating that somebody rush out and go buy, a bunch of high dose vitamins just to, it needs to be taken in the context of who they are as individuals. But in general, from a food standpoint, protective vitamins and minerals that maybe come from food that have been researched and tend to have more of a anti-cancer effect?
Yes. I still think we want to be very careful with sometimes all these kind of supplements. Also, like you said, incinerated yourself, just because that we're seeing a lot of times that we're taking one compound out of the food, then we figure out later that the bioavailability is not great. And there's so many other compounds in the food, flavonoids, and different things that we really don't understand. We can just see that when we're eating this food, it has a super beneficial impact on the body or on cancer. But then we take one thing out, like C vitamin, and then it doesn't have the same effect. So we want to be a little bit cautious about sometimes just kind of relying too much on synthetic vitamins especially, but we do have, I would say, pretty convincing research, especially stuff like selenium. We know that impacts also glutathione and is strongly protective, especially for prostate cancer. Again, I would always test it. I mean, because I'm seeing a lot of practitioners who's just prescribing it, and some of them have borderline high selenium, and they might have other matters. So it's not going to it's just like if you need sleep, it doesn't help that you exercise more. You need sleep. And it's the same with some of the supplements. You're not going to get a better effect by reaching toxic high levels. You want to take what your body is needing. But aside from that, I am seeing most clients have low folic acid, and we're getting that from green leafy greens, so better up that. In supplement form, sometimes we're also seeing these scare campaigns come out in the news that folic acid can increase cancer. And it is simply because it's about balance. Everything is about balance. Yeah. And some of the research is also done on synthetic vitamins. And I'm a little bit cautious about synthetic vitamins because I feel like there might be some issues compared to the naturally derived vitamins. I don't feel like we have enough research to really understand. And aside from that, we know that B12 is something a lot of people are lacking, also for DNA repair. And we also want to ensure we get enough vitamin D. I mean, we have the RDA set for 400 international units right now. And again, as an allopathic dietitian, we stick to RDA. And that is simply not cutting it because the RDA is set for avoiding deficiency symptoms. It's not set according to someone who's sick and has an increased need. It's not set for an athlete. It's not even set for optimal health. So it's not high dosage to say that one should take 4,000 IU, and you can compare it to your blood labs. I mean, we're also saying that blood labs, if we're talking in nanomole per liter, we want to be around 100. And if we're talking about the other, I don't know, how do you measure it? Are you measuring it in the nmol per liter, or are you using the other measurement?
Well, it's usually in the serum. In my practice, it doesn't get measured much just because it's difficult to get blood work on some of the other kids that I work with. But right at the moment, I'm kind of blanking on the unit conversion.
No, it's just because if it's like that, I just want to make sure it's just because in the States, a lot of you guys are using the other unit, and then you don't want to be around 150. So it's only if it's the nanomole, we want to be 150. Otherwise, we want to be like 80 or something.
Right.
So just make sure you have the units correct when you're looking into that. But we know that that amount, that's going to be better for cancer protection. And that's also what's required if we were outside in the sun for like an hour, getting full body exposure, that we would easily produce 10,000 IU if we were in the Miami sun for an hour. But that also deteriorates.
Yeah, vitamin D, nanograms per milliliter.
Yeah, that's the one.
What it is here in the US. So a couple things on, vitamins, for example, I often tell people, generally, there are certain circumstances where you're deficient in a vitamin. Right? Whether it's because of lack of it in the diet, B12 would be a good example, or the inability to absorb it. And there's other situations in certain patients where they're not deficient per se in B12, but they're biochemically dependent on a continual level or a higher perhaps level. One of those would be in the methylation defects we sometimes see. Well, you've got methionine synthase problems, and we're not getting good conversion of homocysteine to methionine. So sometimes certain patient populations can benefit by continual dosing of higher dose vitamin B, for example, but they're not technically nutrient deficient. They're biochemically dependent, for a period of time. I'm curious about your take on, from what I'm gathering is, in an ideal world, we get our nutrition through our food and healthy water, right? And we keep our toxic load down. But what do you make of the fact of, particularly here in the US, so much of our soil is depleted in nutrients because of just so much chemicals that are sprayed? I don't know what it's like in Europe, for example, or other countries, but here in the US, it's pretty bad. We're getting soil depletion across the board. So where does that come into play, for example, for you, from a nutrient supplement standpoint to trying to get everything from food?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I almost did make it sound like you should just get it from food. And one of my pet peeves is actually your point that it is very difficult because the soil is so depleted. Yes, that brings up how are we going to take it? Also, because typically the whole food-based supplements are very low dosage and they're very expensive. But what I would do is, I mean, the minerals don't have the same issue as the vitamins when it comes to synthetic versus natural. So minerals, I think everyone should be taking minerals. They're so core today. and there can be differences in absorption rate, but without getting into details about that, everyone should take a broad spectrum mineral. Some of them also compete. So again, it's kind of nice to know what you're low on, but it is very difficult to get too much magnesium. I'm seeing a lot of people low in magnesium, also a lot of people low in iodine, zinc. But again, with zinc, you want to be a little bit cautious because that can get toxic. And guys usually don't run low on zinc, according to what I'm seeing. It's more a female thing. Regarding the other vitamins, I would opt for things like green powders. I do like Hawaiian spirulina. You want to avoid China because it's so contaminated with metals. But Hawaiian spirulina, which is just up concentrated, a natural food source. Sprouts, a super nutrient dense. Those are really, I mean, minerals, super greens, and sprouts. If you get them in your diet. And I mean, when it comes to cancer, we also really like the cruciferous vegetables and the carotenoid family and the onion garlic family. But again, yes, we are seeing a 50 to 70% nutrient deficiency of the soil compared to 50 years ago. So it's real.
Are there specific cancers that respond better to dietary changes than others in your experience that you know of?
Especially the hormone cancers. When we're talking about prostate, breast cancer, colon cancer, and even lung cancer seems to, they have better results. Also, especially like Gerson Clinic, they did some studies there where they followed 153 patients over a 5-year period. And that they had much better results with that was melanoma, ovarian, and colon cancer by following that. And that's a mainly plant-based diet, but they also do give their patients small amounts of specific types of, I think it's liver, like it's not a plant, it's not a vegan diet. So they're very specific with the types of protein they're actually getting. And again, some of the amino acids, they are strongly cancer protective, especially leucine and proline. They actually help to prevent the metastasis, the spread of these cancer cells. So I would also take them in supplement form, like leucine, not lysine. I tend to have a pronunciation issue. I hope you know what I'm meaning. It's L-Y, not L.
So lysine.
Yeah, lysine. Yeah,
right.
Not
Gotcha.
L-E. Yeah. Just taking the right thing. And also, I mean, again, if we're looking to translate like amino acid targeted therapy into a diet plan, there are a lot of interesting theories, but it rarely works because the body's immune function requires that all the amino acids are present. So it's going to be very difficult without starving or harming the client to actually starve the cancer. And also because cancer cells, they mutate. They made a study where they figured out, okay, this is a cancer that actually thrives on arginine. Let's starve it from arginine. And that seemed totally reasonable, except that arginine also impacts our immune system in a beneficial way. So you're going to weaken the client when doing that type of therapy. And ultimately, if you weaken the client, how are they going to withstand the cancer? But the thing that also happened was that the cancer cells, they mutated. So they made new cells that became less arginine dependent. And that's also what you're seeing with like other cancer cells, especially prostate cancer, that can thrive on fat. The cancer cells will mutate and adapt according to the sources of fuel available. So I feel like you're going to starve the cancer off, or you're going to starve the client before you get a chance to starving the cancer quite often.
All of it is so complex, and it gets to the inherent wisdom of the body, but the unbelievable ability of the body and things at a cellular level to adapt and change. Unfortunately, sometimes in not so good ways. You know what you mentioned about starving the patient, to kill the cancer, reminds me of the whole thing of, well, we gotta starve off the candida in the digestive tract to get over our candida problem. And it's like, well, candida is always there. It's all, you don't need to get rid of it 100%. It's meant to be there. It's part of our ecosystem. It's part of our ecosystem in our body. And so, if you starve too much, now all of a sudden you compromise immune function, which you need to fight the candida. So it's this, again, you get into these concepts of, well, what's the anti-candida diet? What's the anti-cancer diet? What's the this diet and that diet? I have one thing I wanted to ask you, just real quick, coming back to the China study, which you had mentioned earlier. And I read that book, and I read some other books by Colin Campbell. Very interesting guy. I really enjoyed him. And I'm paraphrasing. But I'm curious what your take is on dairy consumption, cow dairy consumption. Again, like probably anything, too much, not good, right? But, not in all cases is bad. But one of the comments that I at least remember was a concern about dairy consumption and cancer being a oncogenic substance. What's been your impression or understanding or latest research on that, if you know?
I have to say, though, I did the thesis, what is that? Like, I'm going to age myself here, but I think it's at least 15 years ago. So it's not right at the back of my hand. But I do remember, and he also had some valid points. And dairy is complex, right? Because it is meant for a cow to grow. So you're having a substance. Actually, I'm also a little bit cautious about eggs. We're also seeing, because eggs is full of growth hormones as well. And we don't want to give things that are up concentrated, even healthy foods, to a cancer patient when it comes to growth hormones, because that's going to accelerate both the cancer, but also something like Epstein-Barr virus really thrives with the different types of growth hormones. And it's just kind of common sense. Both eggs and dairy, you're looking at foods that are pretty high on growth hormones. And also the casein type in cow product is the A1 these days, which seems to be more inflammatory than the A2. That said, we're looking at study that seems to be beneficial when it comes to the fermented. And again, dosage, are you drinking from cows who are getting also growth hormones?
Mycotoxins.
Milk. Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's pasteurized.
It's interesting with regards to the A1, right? That's a big problem in the autism world because it tends to trigger these opiate type reactions because of the peptides. Whereas the A2, perhaps not so much. I do remember it was the casein. I don't remember if it was the alpha, beta, different forms of casein that they felt tended to be oncogenic. And I tried to look up the mechanism of what it was doing, but it was just observed. And so, and I'm sure it's more than just the casein if there is a connection for certain people. So I just was kind of curious about that because you have these different movements from a nutritional standpoint, particularly if you think about the weightlifting community and, lifting weights, high protein, want to get bigger, et cetera. But, what's the downside to that too? Obviously, dairy is a major allergen. If you just look at from the immunological standpoint, the autism standpoint, not only with the allergic component, but then the casein peptide component, similar to the gluten peptide. So again, my impression is, Christina, some of it comes down to the individual as well. And trying to make these blanket statements, although I get it from a public health standpoint, it doesn't always apply to the individual. So, but in general, do you tend to be pretty cautious or conservative, if you will, on dairy consumption across the board for people with cancer?
Yeah, but I am a little bit conservative across the board for all my clients. I'm not a no dairy person because, again, I really think quality matters and how it's processed. And dairy just tends to be under a lot of crappy processing and a lot of crappy quality. But the fermented products I do like, especially from grass-fed cows. And if you can get it from cows who produce A2, And butter, I am a fan of butter because of the butyric acid, and also these saturated fats can really help a lot of people with satiety, and it also helps the cell membranes. We need some of those saturated fats. And usually you're eating small amounts. I mean, I believe actually the Gerson Clinic also includes a little bit of heavy cream. Yeah, I have to not
ghee?
comment on that. Yeah, I mean, that's also, it's the same fats like butter.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of drinking a lot of just milk or a lot of poor quality kind of regular cow's cheese. I mean, buffalo, goat's cheese, sheep, milk's cheese. Quality matters. I mean, especially when it comes to meat and dairy products. Otherwise, you're getting all the pesticides, the hormones, the bad fatty acids. Yeah.
So the organic ghee and little whipping cream I put in my morning coffee, I'm good to go.
You're good to go. That is healthy. Yes.
By the way, you're talking about butyric acid, and I sort of was going back to the microbiome, almost sort of backtracking to this whole thing on fiber, vegetables, microbiome. Do you have any experience or understanding about short-chain fatty acids, perhaps on cancer cells? For example, we know that butyric acid has a mitochondrial beneficial effect, in upregulating mitochondrial activity, particularly as you sequence into the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. I just was thinking here, as we were talking about glucose metabolism and the shift in a cancer cell to this Warburg effect, where it moves into more of this aerobic glycolysis. It's diverting flow into the Krebs cycle, converting things to lactate, quick activation of ATP so we can get replication. But my thought is well, if the short chain fatty acids, perhaps butyrate, that maybe is having an opposite effect. I'm wondering if that, may have some sort of beneficial influence on cancer cells' propensity to shift towards that Warburg. What you're basically trying to do is get substances moving into the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain so that the cell is not able to replicate so fast. I don't know if I sequenced that correctly or not, but any idea, any experience with that? I don't know if that's ever something that you've looked into.
Well, I'm just going to have to say, this is not something I can give you a clear answer on. I would say, though, that with butyric acid, we know that it's very important for gut health, and for the intestinal lining, and to combat inflammation. And ultimately, when you're combating inflammation in the gut, that is going to have a positive impact on cancer. And also, of course, when you're having short chain fatty acids, that is going to change your body's way of producing energy, because it will shift the way it produces energy, and that also affects the appetite. But yeah, I'm not going to be able to. I think you're going to be better at giving us more biochemically detailed explanation. But yeah, hypothetically, yes, I would say.
I'll put that on my to-do list of things to look up. From a general standpoint, are there different strategies for cancer prevention versus treatment, for example? So, you obviously have somebody who's developed cancer. There's obviously certain dietary guidelines. It seems, at least intuitively, that the same things could be applied to try to prevent it in the first place. It's not all about, all of a sudden there's a problem, so we need to do X, Y, and Z. Much of what we've been talking about, I think, applies to prevention. Would you agree?
I would agree, but I would also keep an open mind. I mean, especially when it comes to amino acid depletion, is it possible that you might be able to, a specific cancer, possibly more with probably a medication blocker that could kind of intervene the pathway in a very short amount of time so that the client doesn't get too weak while you did that? And that's kind of, I guess, what they're doing with, the repurposed drugs for cancer that some practitioners are doing. And that is an interesting concept. But when it comes to nutrition, We can use the keto during chemotherapy, and otherwise I really wouldn't use the keto for a healthy client, honestly. I do believe just in carb cycling, and kind of I think it's healthy for the body to sometimes be in a deficit and overnourished state. And I also believe in kind of we're talking a lot about intermittent fasting, but just eating according to your circadian rhythm, having a normal non-eating window at night. That is, we've all been taught we shouldn't be eating 12 hours. There's nothing really radically new about not eating 12 to 14 hours. So a lot of these things are just kind of common sense. But yes, the keto diet during chemo is, I would say, the main unique component. And then also you can do things like garlic really seems, when it's combined with lemon, to have some special unique properties that can kill cancer cells, at least in mice. And that's not saying the world. But those things where you're using superfoods in kind of special ways in humans, and also flax seeds. We're seeing that mice where 10% of their diet was made out of flax seeds due to the strong estrogenic compounds that can actually protect the body from these damaging xenoestrogens. They had a 50% reduction in tumor. But again, it's a mouse study. But we take these things and then we incorporate it to at least support the body and use food as medicine, recognizing still that the human body is much more complex than a mouse study.
So you mentioned intermittent fasting, and that's become quite popular. Obviously, it goes back to just biological cycling, of how we were developed as human beings. One of the things that it's promoted for is autophagy. So the triggering of the body to try to get rid of old damaged cells, and clearly we need this autophagy mechanism to get rid of ideally cancer cells. So eating within a certain block of time to try to induce the body with regards to that. And you might have some thoughts on intermittent fasting. The other thing I wanted to know with regards to autophagy, if you know, are there certain substances within our food that maybe it's things within butter, maybe it's certain things within vegetables that also have an autophagy inducing effect that people could think about?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And I think we also have a lot of misconceptions, and it's kind of being sold as the golden solution to everything. And we also just have to keep in mind, just as a regular dietitian, what we have seen historically is people who have eating disorders and who are overweight. What have they always done? They skipped eating the entire day, and then they would just collect all their calories at the end of the day. That has always been a recipe for disaster. That said, it is also a recipe for a disaster to be snacking all the time and to be eating till midnight and then starting your breakfast again at 7 o'clock, which some people are also doing. We want to look at really the circadian clock, where different hormones are secreted, also digestive hormones in the middle of the day, to understand timing of meals and why we shouldn't just push the window till the end of the day. Also because the end of the day, I would say that the nutrition clients is pretty clear that when you're eating all your calories at the end of the day, you do tend to gain more weight than if the calories are eaten front loaded. Now, we all like to have a dessert. We like to eat with our family. And I think that is also something that we need to honor, that we are not machines. We are spiritual beings, and our mental health is super important also for our physical health. So I'm not saying to fast at the end of the day. But at 10 o'clock in the morning, we're seeing a drop in cortisol. And what that means is, if you're not having, men are not going to be so sensitive to this because of your testosterone profile. But I am for especially women having breakfast before 10 a.m. Because of that cortisol drop that happens, that's kind of causing our energy, that will force the body to produce even more cortisol if there is no fuel glucose in the body. And that means that we are creating biochemical stress simply by fasting in the morning. And most of us, we are chronically overstressed, And we do not need to create that by fasting the wrong time. And 10 a.m., that your cortisol has been high, a drop happens for the body to continue to function, then we force the body to produce more of these stress chemicals if there is no glucose present. So I think that is a bad idea. And I also think it's a great idea to have a solid lunch at 12 and 1 o'clock because we're seeing higher secretion of stuff like dopamine, digestive enzymes happening. And that means you're going to convert your food much better when you're eating a slightly more solid lunch. And then you want to stop eating 3 hours before bedtime. So no heavy meals after. I mean, if you can stop at 7 o'clock, that would be great. I'm not going to be so black-white to say if you have a small snack, that's going to destroy it. But we do know that if the last meal is too close to bedtime, that's going to disrupt melatonin, your sleep quality, and your body's ability to repair. When it comes to autophagy, that can happen both by simply limiting calories, and that would happen just by fluctuating, also listening to your body. If you can't do that, then kind of sometimes having a salad for a dinner instead of a heavier meal. So you're fluctuating your calories a little bit. Sometimes you're in autophagy because you're eating less. That would be a totally natural way to do it. And you're also in a state of autophagy when you exercise. Can easily enter autophagy. So exercise, there are many ways to have autophagy happening in the body without having to stick to that 16-hour fasting window, which is being promoted as a cure-all at the moment. That said, 12 to 14 hours for most people, it's just common sense. I mean, don't eat a big meal past 7 o'clock. Have your breakfast somewhere around 8 or 9 o'clock. 3 meals, a snack or two, depending on your exercise level.
And
that's kind of...
And obviously limit the amount of calories, right? So, it's the... So it's interesting. So your take really is, it's somewhat different, right, than we hear in other circles and whatever, but I think generally the same. So you're more of an advocate of limit eating past a certain time at night, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. But it's okay to essentially have breakfast because you hear this other concept of, oh no, you got to skip breakfast and, don't eat till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And, but I know for myself, that feels stressful to my body.
Yeah, it is. Biochemically, it is.
And I know other people like, hey, I'm good to go. I'm like, okay, well, that's you. So this again, we're back to this one size fits all approach, which doesn't work. It's never worked, really. I mean, in most things anyway. So very interesting. So I didn't know that about maybe women being more prone to sort of skipping a meal in the morning versus men because of the testosterone. I do know you probably know about the cortisol awakening response, where you tend to get these rise of cortisol very early on, and that's a natural phenomena. But if you wait too long, right, you all of a sudden get a plummet of cortisol, and that triggers a stress response. So that's very interesting. Just real quickly, kind of on this topic, what about exercise? Do you find it more preferential in the morning, afternoon, in the evening? How do you counsel patients on exercise as far as what might be the more optimal time to do it?
Well, now I am kind of doing what is my own pet peeve, and I'm going a little bit outside my scope of knowledge. I would say that if you're looking at the hormone regulation, that is what I would look at kind of from my background, without going into details with exercise because I don't have training in that. But when you're looking at the hormones in the morning, it would be a very bad idea to go for a hard run first thing in the morning because you have so high cortisol. We're also seeing some science that supports there might be a higher risk for stressed out people who go for a run to have a heart attack. But again, people are different. And I know when I was in my 20s, I would go for that morning run. It was fine. But I mean, you can do anything in your 20s. You can party, eat a bag of chips, and that's your dinner. It's like whatever. The best time to exercise according to your hormones is really, if you want the benefit of it actually having an impact on your beneficial sleep, then you want to do it before, but before around 10 a.m. There is something about the light and movement that tends to activate your body's muscle, and that helps to prepare the body for sleep late at night. So it's actually good to do it like in the late morning, but not in the early morning.
Yeah, and that's always kind of what's felt intuitively good for myself as well. And one of the things we've kind of mentioned to people is, if you're having a difficult time figuring out when to exercise, just getting some exercise, consistently is better than no exercise, because you can't quite find the right time from a general standpoint. So as we sort of wrap this up, Christina, let's think about nutrition as part of the bigger puzzle. And one of the things you mentioned prior to the interview. What do you mean by that? Nutrition as part of the bigger puzzle. I have a conceptual idea of that, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I mean, it's just, again, the more I kind of lean into my field, the more I just realize, yes, nutrition is important. But right now we're also living in an era where people think all problems can be solved by what you eat. And people are just eating so ridiculous diets. It is unbelievable. And it's unnecessary. And it's because, humans are very black-white thinking, and that's how we're wired. But unfortunately, we know that all lasting change comes from the gray area, and we're just not very good to master it. But when we're talking about nutrition as part of the bigger puzzle, I'm really looking into things like environmental toxins, wireless technology. How's that affecting our mitochondria? We don't understand a lot about wireless technology and its impact yet. A lot of research has actually been done by Professor Ole Johansson from Karolinska Institute. But there is such a big pushback just because there's so many vested interests in this. But we are seeing that wildlife, insects, something like antibiotic resistance, possibly also neurological disorders in the offspring, where the mom is carrying the cell phone close to the prenatal kid, is being affected right now. It's an overlap between nutrient deficiencies, toxicity, opportunistic viruses and bacteria. And again, this is also like a pet peeve of mine, that we're seeing like people who are like, oh, you have Lyme disease, everything is due to Lyme. When in fact, if you test people for it, 25% are going to test positive for Borrelia. 90% is going to test positive for Epstein-Barr. These things are in us, just like Candida, as you mentioned. And it's like, again, a problem with our thinking. We don't understand what is opportunistic, what is secondary, but what is actually causing. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be treated. We absolutely should treat Borrelia and Epstein-Barr and Candida. But we need to understand, why are these things thriving? And a lot of it is the combination of nutrient deficiencies, toxic load. Chemicals I see in my cancer clients are typically things like styrene, acrylamide, 1.3 butadiene, petrochemicals, lead, cadmium in breast cancer. These are highly cancerous substances, and no diet is going to just magically pull these things out of the body. So if you don't understand just how cancerous these compounds are, you will not get cured. And I have do we have time for one small, and it's just because that really exemplifies just how poor we are in the health community, even well-educated practitioners. I had a medical doctor, and myself, and I would like to say we're both well-educated, but again, I really don't think anyone is in this field is well-educated. But she came to me just to get screened she had lung cancer, and she wanted to look into some of these heavy metals and stuff like that, and coming with the nutrition perspective on that. And we were both just like, this was approximately, I think, 8 years ago, maybe more, 8, 9 years ago. And we were just like sitting there in front of each other, just like questioning, this was so weird. She got lung cancer because she had never smoked or been exposed to passive smoking. And a year or so later, I was looking at some research, and it is well established in the literature that the second highest leading cause of lung cancer, aside from tobacco, is radon. And I'm like, no one told me this in school. And she's a medical doctor. She didn't know this either. and I still want to say this just so I don't feel too bad, because I feel like more people know it today. This was 8-9 years ago. And I felt like like you also say, it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. And I'm like, how can any health practitioner be dealing with cancer patients? You're just providing chemotherapy, but you're not asking them about their home environment. It is like, it's right there. She's going home maybe to a home that is infected with radon. I mean, we don't know that, but at least it should be ruled out. How are you going to expect a better treatment outcome if she's still in a toxic environment related to that disease?
And that's one of the problems of where we are from a conventional standpoint, is the limitation on time for visits.
Yes, true.
One of the reasons I got frustrated early on in my career and went in another direction was I did not want to practice in a system where I had 10 minutes to try to figure everything out, because I knew I couldn't. And that's what I realized even in my residency. I'm like, this is not what I signed up for. This was not what I wanted to do. And because it takes more time, and you need people to follow up, you need people to be interactive. So it's not just the doctor or the practitioner, it's also the patient. They need to be revealing, they need to come forward, they need to be following up and be consistent as well, because sometimes these things take time to unravel. It's not all going to come forward in the first visit. So I love what you're doing. I love the field that you're in. I have a great admiration for the world of nutrition and nutritional biochemistry, and it's one of those things that in my early career I wasn't trained in. We get a little bit of it, but our nutritional educational class in medical school was a complete joke. And so what I've learned over the years are from people like you, and reading things on my own and just trying to integrate the information. And again, like you mentioned, the more we know, the more we realize how much we don't know. But we still know a lot, and we can still help a lot of people, which clearly you're doing. So I'm curious, Christina, do you have any resources, recommendations that people can access? Website, papers you've written, videos, other things perhaps that people can access?
Yeah, I mean, on my website, I also have a list of providers, including yourself, that I like to recommend, because obviously no one is an expert in one field. And I know that it's very important to also, as a patient, to see who has expertise in different areas. So you can go to my website, and there is like media articles and all that stuff. And it is ChristinaSantini.com. And I also want to thank you, Dr. Woeller, because you have been a really important figure for a lot of us for the last, I can only speak for myself, but I became aware of you like 10 years ago, and your research, you're explaining the detailed biochemical reactions. It is truly unsurpassed. So I just want to say thank you, because I don't think you realize just how many practitioners, or maybe you probably do realize it because you get told, but it's just amazing work you do. Yeah.
I appreciate that. And that's one of the things that drives me to continue to search and learn. But I do appreciate the feedback, and it's much appreciated. So, well, Christina, it was a pleasure having you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Functional Medicine Doc Talk podcast with Dr. Kurt Woeller. For more information about this podcast, go to functionalmedicinedoctalk.com.